Today we're going to examine the tale of the Heartless Chicken that ignited lively discussion among the poskim in the year 1709. The class introduces the pivotal figures in this narrative, and we closely examine how each one framed the question, the diverse range of answers that were proposed, and the research endeavors undertaken by the poskim in their quest for the definitive solution. This study about the interplay between science and tradition offers unique insights into the intellectual landscape of the time. The story that we are going to tell tonight occurs in the year 1709. In the city of Hamburg, Altena, Wandsbek, these were three Jewish communities at the time. They were separate communities. Today it's all part of the larger city of Hamburg. But at the time there were three separate Jewish communities, but they were unified. And the Rav, one of the Rabbanim at the time, his name was Reb Tzvi Ashkenazi. He's known to us as the Chacham Tzvi. That is, his collection of responses, Chuvas, are presented under that title. So let's read the story that he tells. Hamburg, the tshuva begins, Siman Ayin Dalid, Hamburg, Tov Samach Tes Leprat Katan, that's the year 1709. Maise Beriva Achas. Once upon a time, or this was actually something that had happened not once upon a time, but right there and then, there was a young woman, a young girl, Shepascha Beten Tarnagoyles, who opened the stomach of a hen, Lahoitzi Bnei Meyeha Bisfas HaShulchan, in order to take out the innards of the stomach, and she was working at the edge of the table. V'chasul echad oimed lamata etzla, and she had a cat, who a family cat was nearby and standing over there. Oimed umetzape, why was the cat there? It was awaiting lechel memasha yipoil arza, because it usually when they would open a chicken and discard the innards, the cat would get a good breakfast. So this is what it was waiting for. Va'amra hariva, and the young girl said, Shaloi matzalev betarnagoyles, something unusual about this chicken. She did not find a heart in this chicken. V'ima balas hatarnagoyles, so the mother of the home, who is the owner of the property, including the chicken, Amra shema oikarav lavade, perhaps, or maybe even close to certain, Hushlach halev la'aretz, you threw the heart down to the ground. Va'achloi hachasul ha'oimed sham muchan lechal hanoifel, and the cat ate it, who's there ready to eat what falls. V'hariva emeres, the young girl says, Ani lo yishlachti l'chasul, I did not send to the cat, ella treifa hertz, that's the Yiddish word, hu hatchoil, which is the spleen. So in other words, I threw the spleen down to the cat, I did not throw down the heart to the cat. And he gives you here the Yiddish, for whatever reason, the Yiddish for spleen at the time was treifa hertz, a non-kosher heart. Both a spleen and a heart could be kosher. They have to be salted properly in order to be kosher. I'm not entirely sure why in the Yiddish of the time, and we have this in other sources from that time, that the spleen in Yiddish was called treifa hertz. Aval halev lo yishlachti l'chasul. However, I did not throw down the heart. Now, hatarnagoyles, this chicken, before it was slaughtered, shmeina ubriya v'toiva, it was zaftik, it was healthy, it was good. Ein ba shum chesar, and it had no damage, v'loy rekoven, and no rotting b'vnei me'ah in any of its innards. V'loy nikar shum roisha milev shenimois anismasmes. There isn't any remnants of what once upon a time may have been a heart or anything like that. It's not like we see something remaining here. V'gam bo'idana b'chaim, and when it was alive, so I guess in his first statement he means now that it's dead, when we look at it, we see it was a healthy chicken. And indeed, when it was alive, Hoisa Chazako Obrio was strong and it was healthy. Ella Shahriva Amra Shaloi Matzas Balei. But the girl says there was no heart in this chicken. Okay, so what do you do when you have a shaila in a net? You go to the Rav. So Ba Maisa Lifnei HaTalmidim. So they brought this question. The lashon, very interesting lashon. Lifnei hatalmidim. The students usually go to a Rav. What does it mean, lifnei hatalmidim? So we'll circle back to that later on. For now, I brought it to the Talmidim. V'hitrifua, and the din was, this is treif. This is treif. So why is it treif? Because we have in halacha, we have a whole subject matter that's called hilchas treifus. What's hilchas treifus? We know that an animal has to be shechted properly in order for it to be kosher, for consumption. However, the Torah says that a basar treifa, we're not allowed to eat. What does this mean? Treifa literally means mauled. So it means, let's say a hechi timsa, a case as follows. Let's say you're in the field and you see a sheep, a cow, whatever it is, that was mauled by a wolf, a lion. It's still alive, but it's severely wounded. So is it okay to say, oh, it's still alive, let me bring the shoichet and quickly shecht it? So that's the din of treifa. The Torah says that no, because this animal is destined to die with the wound that it currently has, so therefore it's already treifa, you're not allowed to eat it. Now this is not only if the animal was literally mauled, it's also the case if it has any disease that the Chachamim listed. In the Rambam in Hilchos Treifus he lists about 70. Any one of these diseases, these are considered life-threatening. And so then it becomes treifa, even if no animal mauled it, or perhaps it was even born that way. If it has that underlying condition, it's considered treif. So in Hilchas Treifus in Yeridei Simemem says the Shulchan Aruch, nitel halev, bein biyad, bein machmas choili, if the heart was removed, whether it was removed manually or it was removed due to illness, treifa. This is one of those examples where the animal is treif, and that's why the lifnei ha-talmidim, when the talmidim paskin, what's the din with this chicken, they said, sorry, if the girl's saying she did not give it to the cat, the girl's saying, I didn't give it to the cat, and I did not see a heart there. So this is an open and shut case in Shulchan Aruch. Remember, at this time, early 1700s, the Shulchan Aruch is already an accepted work. This is the definitive work of how poskim are supposed to be paskening their dinim, and so therefore, it was an open and shut case of treif. However, remember, this tshuva is being presented in the Chacham Tzvi Siman Ayin Dalet. Why is that? Because he's going to disagree with this psak din. Let's read number 3. Tshuva. Now the Chacham Tzvi is going to speak. Toyim kala imrim kain. Whoever says treif is mistaken. Why? Ki davar barurhu. It is very clear. She'i afshar l'shum nivra ba'olam lichyos afilu shah achas beloy lev. It is impossible for any creature to live even for one moment without a heart. V'yia ke'echad abrim, and at the same time function as a regular healthy chicken. V'i afshar. So okay. So basically he's saying, was this chicken alive? Yeah, it was alive. So then by definition, it had a heart. What do you mean? The Shulchan Aruch gives you a case of nitel alev and says that's treifa. V'i efshar l'tzayer klal mitzias nitels. If you want to know what the din of nitel alev is, here we have to come up with a very, very narrow understanding of when this law would have an application. The case would be someone comes, miraculously removes the heart, amputates the heart, and then within 4 seconds comes and shechs it, and then we say, although the shechita was kosher because it was preceded by the removal of the heart, so then it's going to be treif. That's the only real case where this has applicability. What about illness? What do you mean? Maybe the animal got ill, and so ill with heart disease that all of a sudden, the heart slowly disintegrated until it wasn't there anymore. So he says that doesn't work out. Why? If we're thinking about illness, if you want to imagine that the heart was deteriorating to the extent that by the time you slaughtered it, it had no heart left, so then it shouldn't have been on function. It should have been on life support. It shouldn't have been able to walk around and talk and do the things that a chicken does. It wasn't in danger. It wasn't ill. It was healthy. So therefore, we have evidence here. It must be that the heart fell out when they opened up the chicken, and the cat ate it, and so therefore it is kosher. This is what the Chacham Tzvi is trying to say in this tshuva. It's not a long tshuva. Siman Ayin Dalet is not a long tshuva. The thrust of the tshuva is basically this logical, what we would call a logical, reasonable type of argument. He's not invoking any sources with this. He's just saying, by definition, I know it was alive, I know it had a heart, and so therefore the animal is kosher. He does bring 2 sources. One source he brings is a Kesef Mishnah on a Rambam, which we're not going to include in the presentation. There is another source that he brings, which is the Zohar. He brings the Zohar. What does the Zohar say? The Zohar is on a very different matter. The Zohar in Parshas Pinchas says as follows: The Yisrael avad loin kucha brichuhu liba dechol alma. The Jewish people were made by God to be the heart of the entire world. V'hachi inun Yisrael bein sh'ar amin. Indeed, that is the relationship between the Jewish people and the other nations. Keliba bein shaifin, as the heart among limbs. Just as the limbs cannot survive without having the heart, even for 1 second, so too the nations of the world cannot exist in the world without the Jewish people. In other words, the Zohar is giving here a model where Jewish people and the nations of the world are actually one body. Don't think of it as two entities that have no relationship with each other. No, there is a relationship, an important relationship between Am Yisrael and Umas HaOlam. We're one body. And there needs to be a shearing model in where, just as the heart shears life with the rest of the body, so too the Jewish people are supposed to shear values and the morals and the Torah ideals and Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, etc., with the nations of the world. Now, sometimes throughout history, the nations of the world have said, no, thank you, heart, we're not interested in your blood. But that's not good for them. And that's not how it's supposed to work. Sometimes Jews may at times feel, well, we have nothing to give anymore. We have no contribution anymore to make. That's also an error. The proper functioning organism is when there is a degree of unity where the heart recognizes its position as the heart, acts as a heart, and all the limbs are there to accept the hashpah that is coming from the heart. The Zohar continues and says, "Va'uf hachi Yerushalayim begoy sh'ar aron." So too Yerushalayim amongst all other nations, kiliba begoy shayofin, is also like a heart among the limbs. Meaning, this idea that it's Yerushalayim is the center of the world. It's the center of the world, just like the heart is the center of the body. And the life of all countries and all nations around the world is coming from Yerushalayim, is coming from Eretz Yisrael. And here again, sometimes coming back to this idea of there can be a protest against it. No, we're not ready to accept, or we're not ready to give. That's not a healthy reality. I was thinking, at least l'chiduda, that when something happens to the toe, it doesn't really get a lot of attention. When something happens to the heart, a lot of attention. Everyone comes running, right? So we know when something happens in Eretz Yisrael, everyone comes running. Everyone wants the news covers it. Happens in Mongolia or whatever, no one cares. Well, okay, so maybe that's related in some way to what happens, what's the Zohar is saying over here. Now, why is this relevant to us? It seems very odd. The key over here is, it says about the heart that the limbs cannot survive afilu riga chada. So the Chacham Tzvi is bringing this, you see. I have a source here in Torah that the chicken would not be able to live even for one moment without the heart. And this is why he thinks that he's so right when he says this chicken definitely had a heart and therefore is kosher. However, now already we have a conflict because we have the original psak and we have the Chacham Tzvi who gave a dissenting psak. What happens when you have two piskei dinim? By definition, at least in this century, in the 18th century, you're going to have each one seek out additional support from other Rabbanim to support their side. And that's what happened over here. And there were a nice number of Rabbanim that got involved in this. And one of them, his name was Reb Moshe Rothenberg Ziskind. Now, he's very important in the story because he actually was also a Rav in Altena in the same place that the Chacham Tzvi. I mentioned the Chacham Tzvi was a Rav in Hamburg, Altena, Wandsbek, three communities that were associated with each other. In Altena, actually, the Chacham Tzvi wasn't the only Rav. They actually had a rotation. The Chacham Tzvi did 6 months, and Reb Moshe Rothenberg Ziskin did 6 months. And where do we get this information from? Because the Yavit, who's the son of the Chacham Tzvi, wrote an autobiography called Megillah Sefer. In Megillah Sefer, he writes about this particular arrangement. So this is, so to speak, in a sense, it's another Rav who's that's encroaching a little, at least from the Chacham Tzvi's perspective, and he writes as follows: Shehu treifa gomer de'araisa. This animal, I support the original psak. This is treif. Why? Because Pasku Tosfos and the Rashba and the Rosh and all the Rishonim and the Achronim say this din nital halev treifa. Ve'ein cholech bazen. We never found anyone who dissented. That's where the Shulchan Aruch got it. I showed you before that the Shulchan Aruch says treifa. If the lev is removed, it's treif. Where is that coming from? From these Rishonim. Chazal don't say it clearly. There's no teaching in Chazal that says nital alev treifa. So Tosfos already discussed it and says why. One of the treifas of Chazal is that if there's a puncture in the heart, it's treif. So Tosfos says if once you told me that if there's a puncture in the heart, it's treif, if the whole heart is not there, it's treif. And that's why all of these are showing him, Tosfos, Rashba, and the Rosh, and others mention this din, and it made its way into the Shulchan Aruch. So Reb Moshe Rottenberg Ziskin thinks that it's wrong to ignore all that. The Chacham Tzvi has a shaila. What do you mean? We saw it was alive. So how is it alive if it didn't have a heart? So he says, okay, so we'll have to come up with some sort of explanation. So what's the explanation? Maybe the heart got smaller and smaller because of a disease, gradually, and the last remaining iota of heart, mamish, a minute before they shechted it, and that's the case where theoretically it could be possible. You're going to say, hold on a second, why then is this, we're looking at it now, we see it's a strong body, it's shmeina. So he says, maybe the illness began just 3 days. Okay, so it was gradual, consistent, but within 3 days. And it went really intensely. So 3 days is not enough time to lose the body fat that had accumulated throughout its life. So Rav Moshe Rottenberg Ziskin is saying, is there a way of somehow coming up with a system, an explanation where it was functioning somewhat healthy and still not having a heart? He thinks he came up with a model, and he thinks this is the meaning of all the Rishonim when they said no heart is treif, and so therefore he disagrees with the Chacham Tzvi about this psak. So far we have 3 voices in this conversation. We have the original Talmidim, we have the Chacham Tzvi, and we have Moshe Rothenberg. Okay, now there was a very important Rav at the time whose name was Reb David Oppenheim. Reb David Oppenheim, we actually mentioned in last class, when I mentioned the Ksav Yad, the only surviving, in those days, surviving Ksav Yad of the Rashbam, was in his collection. So he was alive during this story in the early 1700s, and his chuvas were not published during his lifetime. He prepared them for print, but he never printed them. And only in 1972, between 1972 and 1982, his chuvas were published in a set of svarim called Nishal David. And it includes also some letters that were sent to him. So here we have a letter that was sent to him by a man named Reb Yusfa Koyen. His name was Yosef, nickname Yuspa. And the question, he's asking Reb David Oppenheim to weigh in. Let's read the question. I'm not going to read it inside yet. I'm just going to look at the Hebrew and I'm going to summarize in English the question. There was a story in our city where a young girl opened up the stomach of a chicken, removed the innards, looked for the heart, didn't find it, told her mother, who was with her in the same room. The mother said, well, maybe you threw it down to the floor. And indeed, I saw a cat there that was walking around in the room. So maybe the cat ate it. The girl says, no, I know for sure that I did not throw the heart. And right after I opened up the chicken, I looked right away to see if there was a heart, and it wasn't there. And says Reb Yusfa Koyen now, and I ruled that this chicken is treif, kipshata shulchan aruch. In other words, he's saying the question came to him. Why? Because this is how, he says, how the other Rabbanim paskined in other cases when it happened. In other words, it's not the first time in history that they had a shaila of a chicken without a heart, and there was precedent, and this is what was the answer. However, he says, v'achshav, now we have someone who's ma'arer, and who says that I'm wrong. So I'm turning to you, Reb David Oppenheim, one of the Gdolei Ador, and hadinimi, who's right? And then he concludes his tshuva saying, I didn't write the question at length with all my arguments and all the svaris and all the rayas. Why? So here we'll read inside, Mipnei tirda d'shmaya, I'm busy with a noble cause. Hamutal alai, what is it? L'ravoit samoin yoshvei beis hamedrash b'tchilas hazman. Because it's the beginning of a new learning session, and I have Talmidim, and I need to be with them. I need to give them shiurim. So because of my involvement with them, I didn't have the ability to write you a full tshuva. So therefore, lo yuchal laharchiv hadibur. That's what caused that I could not write my tshuva at great length. Okay. So what do we gain here? We gain here. Now we know who got the original question. If you remember, the Chacham Tzvi said the Maisa came lifnei talmidim. What did he say lifnei talmidim? The woman brought it to the yeshiva. In the yeshiva, there were talmidim. There was also the Rosh Yeshiva, who was a prominent Rav. We know this Reb Yusfa Koyen from other places. He's called Hagoyin, Hagadol, whatever. So he was a very prominent Rav. It was brought. Now maybe the Talmidim discussed it. Maybe he said, "Guys, what do you think?" It's very possible that the Talmidim were involved. But ultimately, the psak din was given, and we only learned this in 1970s when these shuvas were published. That the psak din, Yuspa Kohen is saying, "I was the one who gave the psak," and he's being called. Talmidim, Chacham Tzvi is kind of gliding over the fact that yes, there was Talmidim, but ultimately there was a Rosh Yeshiva there was a Rav, and he's the one who ultimately gave the Psak Din. It's this Reb Yuspa Kohen. So that's one thing we gain from this particular question. And now Reb David Oppenheim is going to weigh in, okay? And he's going to share what his voice is going to be. So we already have 3 voices. Now we're going to get a 4th voice about what should be done in this particular case. But before we see what Reb David Oppenheim's answer is, it's important for us to read this shaila, the way it's presented to Reb David Oppenheim again. And the reason is because we're going to read it now slowly in the Hebrew. And I want you to pay attention to what jumps out at you at how the question here is presented differently than the way the Chacham Tzvi presents the question. Now, to be sure, when I read it quickly, all of the facts were generally the same. It's the same story. It's not that one is saying it's night and one is saying it's day. But when you read it closely, there are certain nuances, what Chacham Tzvi said and that Yuspa Kohen doesn't say, or the other way around. And each one, you're going to see the details kind of bias you toward their side of the story. So let's read it now slowly. Maisa shahaya b'yireinu, shenaira achas pascha beten tar negoiles. Okay, she opened the stomach of a chicken. V'hoitzia b'nei ha'ma'ayim, and took out the innards. What's missing here? If you remember, the Chacham Tzvi said it was bisvas hashulchan. It was at the edge of the table. Why does the Chacham Tzvi say it was at the edge of the table? Because the Chacham Tzvi wants you to believe that it's more likely that it fell down without the girl realizing and the cat ate it. So you need to stress it was at the end of the table. Yuspa Kohen wants you to believe that the heart was never there, and so therefore he doesn't stress that fact. Another thing, you'll notice here that Yuspa Kohen just calls it a tarnagoyles. At no point does he go out of his way to say, Shmeina, Ubriya, it was healthy. Chacham Tzvi was very into that, because Chacham Tzvi wants to make a case that it was very unlikely that there was no heart there. And so therefore, what builds the case? Saying that it was a healthy chicken, etc. Let's continue reading. She searched out for the heart and didn't find it. These words, that she looked for the heart, an active search for the heart, is not there in the tshuva of the Chacham Tzvi. Because the Chacham Tzvi wants to again present the case that she didn't realize and it ended up in the cat. But he wants to make the case, no, this girl really looked, really checked. And that's why we believe that there taka was no heart there. Let's continue. She told it to her mother, who was with her in that room. You'll notice by the Chacham Tzvi did not stress that the mother was with there in the room. Why is that? Because if you want to say that something happened without realizing, it's much better to not stress that the mother's in the room, mother's out of the room, and yes, so higher chances something happened without you realizing. If you have an adult in the room, lower chances that something happens without you noticing. So he goes out of his way to stress that the mother was in the room. Okay, the mother says, Shema yishlachta es halev, maybe you threw it to the ground. When the Chacham Tzvi puts words in the mother's mouth, it says Shema oivadai, karav levadai. Here, we don't have karav levadai. Okay, I think the drift is clear. The mother continues, in fact, I saw a cat that was walking around this room, implying, I saw the cat. Did the girl see the cat? No, the girl didn't see the cat. Remember Chacham Tzvi? The cat was standing at the foot of the table, Yoshevu Mitzape, waiting to consume the food. Chacham Tzvi is building a case that the cat ate this. Here, like, the girl doesn't even know the cat. The mother comes up, that by the way, there was a cat over here. Okay, then Heshiva Anaira, the girl answers, I know for sure that I did not throw the heart. That word's bevadai is not there in the Chacham Tzvi. The girl says, I didn't throw the heart, I threw the spleen. But the words bevadai are not there. Rak teikaf achar psicha, again, chafasti achar alev. I looked for the heart. Words that you don't have in the tshuva of the Chacham Tzvi, v'loi hoyaboy. So by my count, you have at least 8. I counted here 8 nuances. Again, in general, all the facts are exactly the same. You're not getting conflicting reports. But I think there's a tremendous lesson that you see over here of how when you have a certain perception of what the outcome of the case is, that's going to shape what type of details you're going to highlight. What are you going to say and what are you not going to say about the particular case? And just think about this for a moment. What about those cases where you only have a tshuva where one voice tells you what the case is and you don't have two voices? And that's the majority of cases. Think about how wild that is. The majority of cases you only have one voice. Here you have two voices and you realize, wow, this makes things much more complicated. Okay, anyway, it goes to Reb David Oppenheim. And Reb David Oppenheim is going to give his answer. What's his answer? He is going to side with Reb Yosef Koyen, the original Poisik. He's going to side with Reb Moshe Rottenberg, the second Poisik, and against the Chacham Tzvi. The Zoyar. So there's a very long tshuva of Reb David Oppenheim. And we're not going to do all of it, just small bits and pieces. So Reb David Oppenheim says, you quoted a Zoyar, Ein raya midivrei hazayar lenidan dedan. There's no, you can't bring the Zoyar as evidence. Why can't you bring the Zoyar as evidence? He says two reasons. Number one, the Zoyar there is comparing the Jewish people to a heart. And it says that the Ivarim can't survive without the heart. What heart are we talking about there? A human heart. We're not talking about an animal heart. Do you think it's so pashut that you could derive one from a human heart to animals in terms of the makeup of the human being? And animals is not a pashut thing at all. And he gets into this a little, but we're just going to suffice with that point. And therefore, don't bring me a raya from the Zohar. Maybe theoretically it is possible that a human being can survive even 1 second without a heart, but theoretically maybe a chicken, there is a way that it could survive without a heart. That's the first thing he says. Second of all, he says about the Zohar, he says, the lashon is, shelo yachlu lemekam ba'alma, that the nations of the world cannot survive without the heart. What is it, lemekam ba'alma? It doesn't mean that without the Jewish people, they will be completely non-existent. He brings the story, a pasuk from the story in Yeshua, when Rachav tells Yeshua and Kalev, tells the spies that came to her house. And she says, we heard what happened when you left Mitzrayim, vayimas levavenu, and our hearts kind of melted, v'loi kama oid ruach misha, and we all lost our ruach. And the lashon is v'loi kama oid ruach. So does it mean they all died? No, the non-Jews in Jericho didn't all die. They lost their morale. So that's what it means. So too in the Zohar, it could theoretically mean, he explores a possibility, that the nations of the world could exist, they just wouldn't have real chayes, they wouldn't have real life, they wouldn't have meaning in life, however you want to interpret it. And so therefore, coming back to the chicken, maybe there's no raya from here that the chicken cannot live without the heart. Then he brings another thing. Reb David Oppenheim brings a Gemara in Yuma. And from this Gemara in Yuma, he's going to want to bring a raya that indeed animal, and in this case it's going to be a human being, can live without a heart. So what's the Gemara in Yuma? The Gemara in Yuma Daf Pehei Amar Aleph says as follows: Tanu Rabbanan ad heichon hu boidik. To what extent do we need to check? It's talking about over here when there is an avalanche and there's rubble and there are human beings stuck under. And now on Shabbos we need to go and excavate in order to take out the people who are buried underneath. So this is a malacha on Shabbos, which we're not allowed to do. However, Pikuach Nefesh pushes off Shabbos. Comes the shaila, what happens if we're digging, and we half expose a person? So to get him out, we need to continue, which is asar on Shabbos. If he's alive, you take him out. So if he says, hi, I'm alive, take him. What happens if he's not responsive? So now we need to check for signs of life. So the Gemara says, what is this process of checking for signs of life? So the first shita says, ad choitma, you check for the breathing in the nose. V'yesh oimrim ad libay, you check for the heartbeat. Amar Rav Papa says, Machlekes momata l'mayla. This debate is only if you're digging, imagine you're digging, and you first find a person's shoes, and then you find the ankles, and then you find the knees, and then you come down, and you continue digging, and then you reach the heart. That's where we have a machlekes. One opinion says, you check for a heartbeat, no heartbeat, then you stop digging on Shabbos. The other opinion says, no, I'm more machmer, you need to continue digging, and you need to check the breathing with the nose. What if it's the opposite case? What if you first find the guy's yarmulke, and then you find the forehead, and then you get down, and then you see the nose, and you check, and there's no breathing? Once you checked by the nose for the breathing, then you don't continue to dig on Shabbos, and we pronounce the person dead. This is a pasuk in this week's parsha, in Parshas Noach, where it describes the destruction of the Mabul as eliminating life, and it says, who died? Of anyone that had, however you want to interpret these words, but life, ba'apav, in their nose, in the nostrils. So we see that the Torah celebrates, so to speak, or highlights life with breathing, and so therefore, once you check, that's the main thing. And so therefore, once you're going Momaila Lamata, discovering the respiration first, that's enough to declare a person dead. Says Reb David Oppenheim, Mikol Zemavur, from here we can derive the Efshar Lichis Below Lev, that it's possible to live without the heart. Why? How do we see that from this Gemara? Because what do you see from this Gemara? You see from this Gemara, the main thing is the nostrils. The main thing is the breathing. That's what we need to check. And by the way, the halacha is like the opinion that says that we're always checking for nostrils. So in other words, whether you're going, although there is one shitta that says if you find the feet first and you see no circulation, you stop there. One shitta does say that. However, the halacha is not that way. The halacha is that we're always going for the nostrils. We're always checking for the breath. So that's what life's all about. So if that's so much highlighted, he says, so that the implication is that the heart is not so important for life. If the heart is not so important for life, so now I could imagine a scenario where based on this Gemara, I can say that it is possible for a living creature to live even without a heart. Now, can this be responded to? Of course. And his tshuva is very long, and Chacham Tzvi did respond to him at great length as well. I should say that this discussion right now between Reb David Oppenheim and the Chacham Tzvi about this issue of determining death by the nostrils or determining death by circulation is actually very relevant to a modern medical halacha question, and that's the issue of brain death. If we have time at the end, I'll try to summarize how that's relevant. Okay, the Chacham Tzvi responded to this tshuva of Reb David Oppenheim, and this is in his Shalos Tshuvas Chacham Tzvi Simin Ayin Zayin. And he said, and what happened, and we're not going to go through his responses. I want to show you one piece of his response where he doubles down in this tshuva and says something more extreme than he said in his original tshuva in Tshuva Ayin Dalet. In Tshuva Ayin Dalet he said, look, the cat was there, it makes more sense to say that the cat ate it and just no one realized. That's what he says in Tshuva Ayin Dalet. However, after going on at great length in Siman Ayin Zayin to answer Reb David Oppenheim, he concludes by saying, it's impossible, and obviously this chicken was alive, and it had a full functioning heart, no problem. And he says, even if witnesses, this is where he's going to make his extreme statement, even if witnesses were to come and to say that we were there, kosher witnesses, and we were looking out for our heart, and we were there from the moment, and we didn't see it, I'm not going to believe them. Why? Because ultimately they're testifying against an established truth. What's the established truth? This chicken was alive, it means it had a heart. So their testimony doesn't work out. And look at the end of this quote where he says as follows. And once we've established that even if two witnesses came and said that there wasn't a heart for this chicken, still they're not going to be believed. Definitely they're lying. So we don't need the cat to be there anymore. In other words, even if the case were that there is no cat, he didn't say this in Shuvah Ayin Dalet. This is after he finishes responding to, at great length, by the way, to Reb David Oppenheim. This is what he says. Even if there were no cat in the room, my position is there was by definition, there was a heart there, and so therefore the chicken is kosher. Now, so far we've surveyed 3 voices of people who thought it was treif. We saw the original Rav who paskin, Reb Yosef Katz. We saw Reb Moshe Rottenberg, who was the other rabbi in Altena, together with the Chacham Tzvi. And we saw now Reb David Oppenheim. So 3 voices against the Chacham Tzvi's approach. However, the Chacham Tzvi also sent letters and got support for his point of view. One of the prominent rabbanim at the time in Frankfurt, his name was Reb Naftali Katz. And he wrote a letter to the Chacham Tzvi, and the Chacham Tzvi published it in his tshuvas. That's Shalos Tshuvas Chacham Tzvi Simin Ayin Vav. So far, if you're halting cup, Ayin Daled was the original case. Ayin Vav now is Naftali Katz's support for the Chacham Tzvi, and Ayin Zayin is Chacham Tzvi's lengthy response to David Oppenheim, where at the end he says, even if there's no cat there, the psak would be the same. So let's see the supporting voice from Reb Naftali Katz. By the way, at the end of this tshuva, Reb Naftali Katz, right, by the way, the reason it took so long, this akva, the letter was delayed, ad Erev Shabbos Kodesh. I wasn't able to send it out till Friday. Why? Me'atzlos hamatik. Because of the laziness of the copyist. So this is an important thing just to recognize how a tshuva would work and how these have survived. The way tshuva survived is because the author of the tshuva would keep a copy for himself. He would write a tshuva and he says, the one I wrote I'm keeping for my archive, which eventually turned into the book, Shalos HaTshuvas. He then called his secretary, his copyist, and said, here, copy this out, and that copy will go out. And here he's blaming the maitik as being a little lazy, which is why there was a delay in the response. Says Reb Naftali Katz as follows. Last Thursday, yesterday actually, B'Yom Hey Esmail. Okay, so I guess he was prepared to send it earlier, and then because of this delay, he actually was able to include this anecdote. Yesterday on Thursday, the two dayanim here in Frankfurt were sitting on a din Torah, and their names are, one is Reb Wolf Levi, and one is Reb Zussman, and he's known as Reb Zussman Dayan. And I brought up this issue because you wrote to me about it. So I spoke to them and I said, I had a Maisa, me, Reb Naftali Katz, previously, same issue, a chicken without a heart. Okay, so we're seeing there's a relative, an abundance of chickens without hearts here. I also paskin mutter years ago. And now the same thing happened to the Chacham Tzvi. And there's a controversy that broke out. And he uses the words, Kederech loimdim le'eis hazois she'ena moidim ala emes. This is an interesting line. The Lomdim in our generation, early 1700s, they're not, their search isn't for the truth. It's an interesting line because there's a number of very prominent, famous rabbinic disputes that happened around this time. And Naftali Katz is really accusing his generation, the generation of Lomdim, as not being tethered to the emes. Anyway, so I told them, what do you guys think? They said, we agree with you, mutter, kosher. Okay, so now Chacham Tzvi has Rabbi Naftali Katz on his side and two other Rabbanim from Frankfurt. But here's what's interesting about this tshuva. Said Reb Wolf, by the way, I have a Shulchan Aruch that I inherited from my ancestors. And it's a printed Shulchan Aruch, but there's writings in the margins of the book. And it says over there that there was in earlier generations a Maisa where the lave was removed and the din was mutter, the way we just paskin for you. I got excited, Rabbi Naftali Katz says. Well, what does it say over there? So I went to his house, I searched out, and Varaisi, and I saw Bezeh HaLoshen. So he's telling you that he's giving you verbatim what it says in the margin of this Shulchan Aruch that's in this Dayan Reb Wolf Levi's house in Frankfurt. There was a story in the days of the Maharal. Maharal is Marino Arav Reb Liva. Liva is a German word, name for like Leib, lion, because his name was Yehuda. And Yehuda is associated with a lion. Okay, so there was a mice in the time of Maharal Miprat. Shaloi nimtza leib b'tarna goyles. Again, there wasn't a heart in a chicken. Uvasa ash'ayla lifnei agoy Maharal Miprag. And so the question came to the Maharal. V'hitiras ana tarna goyles. And he says it's mutter. Saying, it's impossible to live without a heart. So therefore, it must be that it had a heart, and after the shchita, it was lost. And so it's a complete heter. Wow. So now not only do we have Reb Naftali Katz, and not only do we have the two Rabbanim of Frankfurt agreeing that it must be there was a heart there, we have a story that happened in the late 1500s during the time of the Maharal, in the second half of the 16th century, where something like this happened as well. This is an ancient handwriting. And when I read this, I felt so excited. I was so excited that my view corresponded with my relative, because he's an Enikol of the Maharal of Prague, Naftali Katz's, and wow, amazing. And he says about the Maharal, Asher Shimish Beruach HaKodesh. Everyone knows that the Maharal used Ruach HaKodesh, so I'm in line with him. I'm really, really excited. So this tshuva gets sent to the Chacham Tzvi, and the Chacham Tzvi disseminates this. So David Oppenheim sees this, and now David Oppenheim has to respond. Because remember, he's on the side that says that the animal's treif because it's theoretically possible even to live without a heart. Says David Oppenheim, in his tshuva addressing this. You said what happened in the Gilyon of the Shulchan Aruch in the name of Reb Leib of Prague. Says, I don't know if this was written by a Bar Samcha. Who knows who wrote this? We don't know who wrote this. And then he says, but even if you're going to tell me that it was written by a reliable person, Af al Pikein, I'm not impressed. Why? Because you could easily say that case of the Maral was talking about a case where the most reasonable conclusion was that the heart was taka lost. So for example, no one checked, no one looked, no one was around, no one was looking. There were other things around. There was a commotion. Then you can say, I got lost in the commotion. But here, David Oppenheim says, we have here a case of a girl saying, I looked for the heart. And I know for sure when I threw it down, it was just a spleen, etc., etc., etc. So then you can't bring a raya from the case of the Maral. And therefore, David Oppenheim says, in his view, this chicken is treif. So again, if you have something to hang your hat on and to say that maybe we weren't paying attention, maybe it got lost, maybe it got dropped, maybe someone was confused, maybe someone was looking, he's okay with that. And by the way, the Moshe of Rottenburg would also be okay with it, because then you would say, instead of assuming there wasn't the heart, you assume that it was, and then got lost in the commotion. But given that here, the best information that we have is that someone was saying, no, the cat didn't eat it, and I didn't throw that to the ground, so then we have to accept that. And that's why they're coming up with these models. Maybe there was taka no heart. And we heard different voices. Ramosha Ziskin was saying that in a matter of 3 days, the heart disintegrated, in 3 days gradually, and that the second before Shchita is when the last ounce departed, right? That was his model. David Oppenheim is even happy to explore that maybe you can live for a duration of time without a heart. This is the matziv, this is how they're paskin here. Now as follows. I mentioned before that in David Oppenheim's collection is not only his shuvas, is also letters that people wrote to him. So we have a letter that was written to him by another rabbi at the time, whose name was Rabbi Yaakov Zmartik. And this actually has a date. The way it's printed in this volume that was printed in 1982, it's printed Friday, Yud Gimel Tammuz, Tov Samach Vav, which comes out to 1706. I need to remind you, this whole story is in 1709. So presumably, the way we're reading it now, is that this tshuva was written 3 years before. Yaakov Zmartik is writing to Reb David Oppenheim. What does he say over here? Yaakov Zmartik says, your holy words came to me, and you wrote in your letter that I should go to Reb Wolf Sagal in Frankfurt, and that I should copy the din that he is purported to have on the margins of his Shulchan Aruch in the name of Maral of Prague. So that's what I did, and this is what I found. And this is the exact language. And here's the language. Yesh b'Kabbalah, we have a tradition. Shamaisa b'lifnei hagoyin kvoid moireinu arav Reb Leib miPrague. That an incident happened with the Maral. Shehuva lefanav tarnagoyles achas. That a chicken was brought to him. V'loi hoya liba. Didn't have its heart. V'hichshira. Maral said, it is kosher. Mitam devadai hoyal olev. It must be it had a heart v'nevad la'achar shchita, and that it was lost after the shchita. De'im loy kain, because if you're not going to say that and you want to say shaloi hoyal olev, that it didn't have a heart, have a davar she'i efshel alichos afilu rega achas. It could not live even for 1 second. Ad kan loshen hagah. V'zero isi pamayim, continues Rabbi Yaakov Zmartik. In fact, he showed me 2 of these notes. One time was on the Shulchan Aruch of his father, in his father's handwriting, and he also showed it to me in another copy of the Shulchan Aruch by another Gadol B'Yisrael whose name was Shmuel Morgenstern, and there it's word for word in the exact way that we had it over here. Okay, so there's 2 issues, 2 problems that we have in this. One is, how are we supposed to understand David Oppenheim 3 years before the whole story heard that there was this margin in the Shulchan Aruch in Frankfurt and sends his student to go find out what happened? It's really bizarre, especially in his initial tshuva that he wrote on this. He didn't show any awareness of this whatsoever. It was only after the Chacham Tzvi published his tshuva with this information, then he responded to that. So this was very, very perplexing to me. And then mamish at the last second, I was going through, this is a book on Reb David Oppenheim. It's called Prince of the Press. And mamish buried in the back in a footnote the author here says that he checked the manuscript of this tshuva, and instead of Taf Samach Vav, he says he reads it as Taf Samach Tes. Now, wait, the truth is I didn't do is check out the calendar to see if it works out with Friday Yud Gimel Tammuz. So we need to do that. But he thinks that it actually, he says that if you read it right, it's the year 1709. So in other words, I'm going to go with that. David Oppenheim sees what the Chacham Tzvi says. He's like, I need to do my own independent research, and he sends his guy to find out what it says in the margin of the Shulchan Aruch, and he gets that answer, and it remains in his collection. Right? His collection of tshuvas, all of Oppenheim's books and manuscripts ended up in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. There's something called the Oppenheimer collection there, and that includes his tshuvas, the manuscripts, and including the letter that Yaakov Zmartik wrote to him. So that's in terms of one issue. There's another issue here you may have noticed, and that is the way Naftali Katz writes and the way Yaakov Zmartik writes about this margin in the Shulchan Aruch, the toichen is exactly the same. There is no toichen, even nuance that I was able to point to that's different. But both told you that they're giving it bizeh haloshen, which means in English verbatim. And they both give different, the words are not the same. The words are not there. So how are we supposed to understand this? I don't know. My best bet would be that because Yaakov Zmartik is there on a shlichus for David Oppenheim, and he says he looked at both copies of Shulchan Aruch and is there the exact same, it seems that he was copying word for word. Rav Naftali Katz had a phenomenal memory. I'd assume that he looked at it, and that he memorized it, and then he went home and then conveyed it. That would be my best guess over here. Okay, let's continue with our story. There were many other Gdolei Yisrael, or a number of other Gdolei Yisrael that weighed in on this subject, some of whom we're not going to touch at all during today's shir. I want to fast forward now a good 50 or so years to the year 1763. In the year 1763, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, who later was the Rav in Altena during this time, he passed away a year later in 1764. A year before he passed away, he published his halacha sefer called Kreisi Uplesi. Kreisi Uplesi is words that we have in Tanakh, where David HaMelech has battalions that are known as the Kreisi Uplesi. There's a lot of discussion of exactly these battalions, who they were, and what their jobs were. Chazal say as well that it's a reference to the Urim V'Tumim. But either way, for whatever reason, he used this as the title for his book. And he comes to Siman Mem, where it talks about the din of Nittel Halev, where the heart is removed. And this is what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz writes. He says, the beginning of the Chacham Tzvi, Siman Ayin Dalet, I love it. Siman Ayin Dalet is great. Why? Because he says there's a reasonable chance that there was a cat in the room. The girl says she saw, but maybe she didn't. And as much as she thinks she did a good job, maybe she didn't. The taka fell on the ground. The cat ate it. You have something to be toila on. That makes so much sense. I'm in full support of the Chacham Tzvi in that reality. However, v'soifan, the ending of what he wrote is marar, is very, very bitter. Why? Because in Shuvah Ayin Zayin, he said, even without the cat, which means even nothing to be toila on, I'm still going to assume that the din is that there had to be a heart there and that it's going to be kosher. He says, no. He says the key is, do you have something to hang your hat on, as the other Rabbanim were saying? Then in a Chanami, you're not going to say, I assume this chicken had to have a heart. It makes more sense to say, I assume it did, and that this type of accident or neglect or whatever it is happened. And he says, by the Maharal of Prague, he's sure that the case the Maharal was talking about, and I know in the language the Maharal said you can't live with a heart for 1 second, but still he says, I'm sure that case, and you have to look at that case must have been a case where there was a reasonable possibility that something else happened. And so therefore, the Maharal was happy to say, no problem, it had a heart, and this something else occurred. And he says, Hasma lahaskir, what Chacham Tzvi said, that even if you were to have Edom, he's going to disregard what the Edom say. Okay, but then, like all the Rabbanim, what's your theory? What's your theory then? How could we understand a situation where the chicken doesn't have? The Chacham Tzvi has a strong argument. You can have a chicken without a heart, and we all know it was alive. No one's disputing that, and it looked healthy. So what's your model? So let's remember what we saw before. Rav Moshe Rottenberg came up with the theory of, 3 days, and it got gradually worse until a second before Shechita disappeared, right? That was his way of thinking about it. David Oppenheim suggested, maybe you can live without a heart. He was open a more extreme type of proposal. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz comes up with a different suggestion. What's his suggestion? He says, in summary, what's the heart? The function of the heart is to circulate the blood. It is possible to conceive a reality that there's another organ that takes over the function of a heart. An internal, so to speak, heart transplant, where there's something else that does the job of circulation. And when we open it up, we're like, hey, there's no heart here. But in reality, yeah, you're right, there is no heart here, but it was alive because something else was managing the circulation, in which case, that's called nital halev, which means the animal is a treifa, which means that it's not kosher, you can't eat it. This is the model that he comes up with for how you could say there was no heart and yet the chicken was alive. Now this is a very radical thing to suggest, right? So here's where this gets really interesting. He says in the third paragraph, so in order to work this out, I went to the scholar, I wrote to this great Talmud Chacham whose name was Reb Henech Halle. Halle is a city in Germany. So he wrote to Reb Henech Halle saying, please submit a question, shekoirin response, giving the Latin word a responsa. Please submit a question to the professors, the roifim b'Halle. So in Halle you had a medical school, and please go over there, ask them this question, this possibility. And he did that. And they wrote a response in German. And here, I'm going to translate it to you. And in his Sefer, Crazy Uplacey, he's giving, I don't know how common is this, where a question was asked of medical professors, and the answer is translated, ois ba'ois, word for word, verbatim translation in the Sefer. So let's read what their tshuva is. Before we read the tshuva, Halle is in the general vicinity of where Altena, where Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz was living. So that could be one reason why he's turning to Halle. Another important point is that Halle was one of the only medical schools at the time in Europe that accepted Jews. So they were friendly to Jews. That could be another thing. Also, it looks like he knew a Jew who lived there, and he was able to get this shlichus done. Okay, so he says as follows. We received 2 questions. We don't know why we're getting these questions. So we gathered together for a meeting, and after deliberating, we agreed that this is the response, and here we're giving you the response. The first question was as follows. Is it possible for a living creature, any, to live for any amount of time after the heart was removed from it, whether by illness or from any other cause? So the answer to that is, first of all, you need to know that it is not possible, according to medical science, for a heart to completely disintegrate and disappear through illness. It could become damaged, it become malfunctioning in one way or another, but the idea that illness means no heart, that can happen. But if you were to come up with a case where you were to remove the heart in its entirety, so then the answer would be no. It cannot live without the heart, even for one moment. So in other words, turn to David Oppenheim. David Oppenheim was willing to explore the possibility that a creature can live without the heart. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz asked about that and got from the medical professors in Halle that this is not possible. However, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz asked a second question. About the second question. So they opened the chicken and they didn't find the heart inside the chicken. Couldn't we say that another limb that is acting in the place of the heart is taking over the function of the heart, and therefore the chicken will be able to live? Our answer is, it is impossible for any living creature, whether a bird or whether a land animal, to live without a heart. Or, here's where it gets interesting, at least another limb or a piece of flesh that's alive that will function as the heart, which means it has to have a cavity, and it has to have vessels, and it has to have veins, and it has to have all of the mechanisms that a heart has in order to circulate the blood. If it does have a limb like that, then definitely it is able to live, whether it's a land animal or a bird. In fact, it can live for a long time, even though it doesn't look like a heart. So in other words, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz presented a possibility to them, and they bought it. The first possibility, which is David Oppenheimer's possibility, they didn't buy. But the second possibility, they did. And that's, you see that he was very, Rabbi Yonasan Abish was very proud he came up with an idea, he formulated the question, he got the answer, and so therefore he says, now I have the medical professors in Hala who are supporting me, and this is why I think this is what we should say happened in these cases. And we could therefore say that's nital alev, that's what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, there's taka, no heart there, which means the animal is deathly ill, and which makes it a treifa, and at the same time is able to live. And this is the right way of understanding it. In that sense, he says, even here, if there's a cat there, he still have to go with the cat, 100%, that's more reasonable. But Benegea case, where we have witnesses that say we looked and we were on top of this and there was no heart there, this is the most reasonable thing to say, and he comes therefore down on the side against Rabbi Yonasan, against the Chacham Tzvi. Again, this is in 1763 that he publishes his Sefer, so it was long after the Chacham Tzvi had passed away. Okay, now let me show you something interesting, if you get the light there for a second. One second, let's finish up. Okay, there is a very chashve Yid whose name is Yitzchok Isaac Hakoyen Reichman. He's widely known as Edward Reichman. So he's a good friend of mine and a very important Jew. He comes to the JLI retreat every summer. He practices emergency medicine at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx, and he's a professor of bioethics at the Einstein Medical School. And his expertise is, amongst other things, is also the history of medical halacha. So he wrote a lot about this subject and many other subjects of medical ethics. And in fact, the first time I learned about this whole topic was from a shiurim that he has given on this subject. A number of years ago, he's like, you know what, why don't we reach out to the university in Halle and see, do they have a record of their German response that they wrote? So he reached out to them, and they sent him this document that you could see over here. It's a ledger that goes through, it's a summary of all of the tshuvas that these professors wrote. It's not the actual tshuva, it's just like a mafteach, telling you what it is about. And on the right-hand side of the page over there, I'll blow it up a little bigger over here. You can see it says 1763 on the far left over there, and it says 8th of January, and translated into English, it reads as follows. January 8, 1763, a responsum to 2 questions from the Jewish community concerning the circumstances of Jewish kosher slaughter has been issued. This is what we have over here. So there's every reason to believe that this is a record of the tshuva that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz put into his sefer, Kreisi Uplesi. Now what's interesting about it is Kreisi Uplesi was printed in what year? In 1763. That means this big chunk in Siman Mem, he's working on a few weeks, a few months before, because they received the response, or at least they're writing the response, or they received the question in 1763, in January. And it's within a few months that the Sefer is published. So that's very interesting. It's also interesting that they write, in the tshuva, he writes that they don't know why they got it. In the body, lo yadanu sibasam, we don't know why people would ask the question, could you live without a heart? And we don't know why you would ask if another limb could take over. But here, the one who wrote this seems to have known, because he writes, it's a question concerning ritual slaughter. So these are some interesting points about this particular discovery, and he wrote about it and published it, and I personally find that fascinating. Okay, now to close this out, we have a Tzemach Tzedek actually, because the Tzemach Tzedek wrote on Yeridei, you can turn the lights back on. The Tzemach Tzedek wrote on Yeridei, Piskei Dinim, and the Tzemach Tzedek writes about the din of Nital Alev. He writes in Siman Mem, see Tshuvas Chacham Tzvi, quoted in Kreisi Uplesi. It looks like Tzemach Tzedek at that time didn't have the Tshuva Chacham Tzvi. He says, look at what the Chacham Tzvi, the way it's presented in Kreisi Uplesi. And look at the Tshuva of Reb Moshe Ziskin that we saw earlier. And the ikar is kachras hakreisi uplesi. He passed, and Tzemach Tzedek says that the psak follows Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, which means, in summary, if you have something to be toila on, no problem, you're going to be toila on that. But if not, we're not going to say that the animal was for sure had a heart. We're going to accept this theory that something happened that we may not fully understand that allowed it to live, and indeed it didn't have a heart, and so therefore it's going to be treif. Okay, so this is, one second, so this is an overview But in a sense, it's also only a drop in a bucket because so many of the tshuvas are really lengthy and there's so many really fascinating discussions that we have over here. And about brain death, we're not going to talk about that because we don't have time. I do want to finish with one idea that I think is a hayra. We're supposed to take hayra from everything. And the question is, what's hayra to take here? So I want to make a suggestion. You have, in another context, a entity, an organism without a heart. In the literary context. What am I referring to? We spoke about this previous class, the fact that the Tanya in its original edition did not have Perek Lamed Beis. Perek Lamed Beis is not just by happenstance the 32nd chapter, it's the Lev of Tanya, it's the heart of Tanya. It talks about Avos Yisrael, and that's kind of like the heart that animates all sections of the Tanya. But you also know that in the Madura Kama, as I just mentioned, there was no Perek Lamed Beis. So I was thinking to myself, is it possible to have a chicken without a heart? Is it possible to have a Tanya without his heart, without Perek Lamed Beis? How is it even possible to imagine something? But the answer is, this Tshuva of Rabbi Yonasan Abishitz is the answer. That something else could take the function of the heart. Why is that? Perek Lamed Beis does not introduce any new idea. It does not say, by the way, if you want to have Avos Yisrael, let me introduce a new paradigm shift for you that you don't know of before. No. How does Perek Lamed Beis say, if you do everything that I spoke about in the earlier chapters in Tanya, so then it's a derech yashar of a kala, love ledekim mitzvahs Avos Yisrael. So in other words, originally the Alter Rebbe assumed, I don't need to put Perek Lamed Beis there, because if you study the first 31 chapters of Tanya really, really well, and you tease out the implications, automatically you're going to have Avos Yisrael. In other words, you have the heart in Perek Aleph, and Perek Beis, and Perek Gimel, and Perek... The Alter Rebbe later saw that it wasn't good enough. We spoke about why another time. And so therefore he said, you know something? We have to have a heart mamish. And so he put in Perek Lamed Beis. So in here you see a very interesting thing which parallels very much what we're talking about over here. An entity that didn't have its heart because the heart was very much there, just in a different way. And the lesson from that is on the importance of not allowing Avos Yisrael to remain, okay, it's implied. No, we got to stress it. That's something that has to be stressed all the time. And when Am Yisrael are having the Avos Yisrael, then I think, coming back to earlier, Umas Ha'olam are in a better position to say, okay, we recognize you as the heart, and we're here to accept, and we're willing to listen, and we want to be inspired.